Hello, I'm Laara Copley-Smith and Jason Smith is with me today, and we are doing a mini series on men and mental health, and this is our number 2. And our focus today is about anxiety.
That's right.
Yeah, it is. So, and we were going to run through some elements to do with anxiety and what can cause that, trauma, and you're going to be telling us about how that can build up, and then we're going to do something for the toolkit for men.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll always give you a little bit of a tool to use, something that's easy that you can remember as well. If you get stuck, or just as a general health tool as well, really.
A life supporter. So some of the elements that will certainly at the moment be compounding, anxiety is if you lose your job, especially for a man, that's going to be a really big deal. Money and how that affects a man being able to provide for his family.
Yeah, it's much more of an issue as well. That is generally for men, because they generally are the breadwinners. They generally are expected to sort of look after their family and the finances a lot. Not always, but generally speaking, it can be the man. So it can be more pressure can be put on the man on that. And we talked about this in the first part actually as well, Larry, about how the lockdowns affecting things as well. Because even if you've how motivated you are, if you're prevented from working or if you're prevented from bringing in the money, then there's a big stress around that, because it's not like you're too ill to do it, or you don't want to do it. It's someone's literally physically preventing you from actually earning money and looking after your family.
Yeah, I think for a man that would kind of, especially if they work away from home, they work out of the home, and whereas there are more women who are sort of more flexible in becoming home bodies. You understand that a man could actually feel like a caged bird, that they actually want to escape from that situation.
Yeah, it's very unusual. It was more unusual for a man, really, because men, a lot of men work outside first of all, but a lot of men, either whatever job they're working, they'll spend a lot of their time away from home, not in the home with the family. So it's just how sort of things work out. But when that's switched off or switched around, and they're then spending the majority of the time in the home, that's creating a lot of anxiety for men and women and the family, I suppose, because it's just something that's, a lot of men are not used to being in that environment, confined in that environment. And there's the added stress as well that we talked about as well. You're not able to earn the money, so everything is kind of thrown up in the air, really. And that just that in itself creates a lot of, I mean, I know from my personal experience that 3 people that I know during lockdown have had splits, relationship splits, and been together for decades. So this is a real issue.
Yeah, I know people who have actually split in marriages, a couple actually, or partnerships, and there are children involved. So that's just like huge, isn't it? So there's going to be like a build up of tension and anxiety around purely just the dynamics at home, without anything else, without the money, without the loss of a job or the feeling of failure. And then there's also going to be a lot of men who can be affected because perhaps they haven't got access to the children in this time, because we're not allowed to move, or in certain countries, and not allowed to go into other homes other than your own.
It's a big issue, and like you say, you've got everything sort of compounding on top of each other, because just being in that environment on its own, without lockdown, without not able to work, without not able to bring money in, that in itself would cause a stress. Then you've got the added problems of, like you say, of not being able to earn money, not being able to see some of your family. It could be old relatives as well. It could be children who are to different. Quite often, people nowadays have got children to different people. That's a big stress as well. So all these things are kind of being lumped in together all at once, whereas normally you'd have you'd have one stress in your life at one stage of your life. But it seems like at the moment, like all the biggest stresses of life are kind of coming on top of people right at the same time, which could potentially be a mental health catastrophe, really, if people don't get on top of it.
Most certainly. And also, with that feeling of being at home and not being able to go and work and provide, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, or you're losing, that industry is closed. Then men could be in enclosed situations in flats or small spaces, haven't got any outdoor space, but they are very used to being out on the road or working outside. That's a complete change in environment.
Yeah. A lot of men as well tend to be quite physical as well, just by the nature of being a man, really. They tend to be quite physical, and sometimes the fact of not being able to that's quite often a lot of men get rid of a lot of the tension and stress in the body, and without gyms being closed and without being able to go to work and do a physical job, sometimes that in itself is another problem.
Yeah, most certainly, actually. And then, of course, we've talked about, losing your job prospects and feeling that out of control with the future and how you're going to provide. Because some key things in conversations that come up is the man being the provider, the protector, and being the strong one who keeps the family unit together.
Well, that's a really good point, Laara, because when we're talking about mental health issues, everyone in the household will be struggling probably during this time, kids and and wives and everything, and partners, whatever. So but like you've just said, the man is expected to kind of hold it together and protect everyone and be the strong person. So they're not really kind of allowed almost to kind of ask for help, really, because they're supposed to be there for everyone else. So this is kind of one of the big problems for men around mental health, and this is one of the big reasons why men don't get help, because they consider that they're there to sort of help everyone else and be the stable person, whereas like everyone else, they still need to go and get help if they need it, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, historically, the man would have been the hunter, warrior, and protector. So you kind of, and on an instinctive level, that's going to run deep in their psyche. So that belief, that whole feeling inside is being compromised.
That's right.
And of course, they could even be in a situation where the blame, even though it's not their fault, the blame is actually directed at them by, family.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, and even if it's not directed by the family, or it could be the blame that they put on themselves. Saying, I need to do more and I need to do this or whatever. But really, actually, when they think about it, there actually is nothing that they can do because they're very, very restricted.
Yeah. So, and of course, we wanted to talk about trauma and how anxiety can actually can build up and become compounded.
That's
and
right.
Trigger trauma.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I'll give a quick example, just basic of how it works, basically, to give people an example. First of all, you'll have a traumatic event, kind of the catalyst in your life. So quite often this can be sometimes when people are very young, or any time in the life, but quite often it can start when you're very young. What happens in your mind is, if you've had a traumatic event, and again, it can be how your mind remembers that as well, because in context of when you're older, something that might be traumatic when you're young might not be a traumatic event, in the future. I'll give you an example as well. So it is a good example. This was a kind of very basic trauma. A client had a phobia of dogs, and they didn't know where this thing came from, but it stemmed back to when they were very, very young, 6 months old or something, crawling on the floor, and a dog barked in the face, created a massive trauma which had held in the mind for 30, 40 years, and it created other problems and stuff. And sometimes traumas that you have in the past, that something's traumatized you in some way. It can be something very minor, but your perception of it when you're very young can be that it's a very, very major thing, and you're gonna kind of die. But when you look back from the present, you realize it's not actually a serious thing. I had a client that got locked in a car for 30 seconds when they were very young, and they was traumatized by it, because they thought they were trapped and never going to get out, and they was going to die. So they're kind of a bit of an extreme example, but that's how trauma happens. It can happen with anything. It can be it can be by having an experience with specific somebody. It can be having an accident. It can be literally anything. It could be anything in your life that creates a trauma. So when a trauma is created in your mind, what your mind does is it puts in like a protection mechanism. So it basically blocks out that trauma, and to basically protect you, because it's thinking, this is traumatic, I don't want to deal with this. And then as you move through your life, sort of 10, 20, 30 years in the future, this block is still there. But quite often, because your mind's blocked it out, you don't consciously remember, almost always actually, you don't consciously remember what the trauma is. So, and as we talked about, I think in the first episode, if you don't remember, or you're not aware of where a problem comes from, the cause of the problem, you can't provide a cure for it. And this is the problem. So you've got trauma in your mind from wherever in your past. And every time you go into a situation that triggers that trauma, it can be meeting a person, it can be listening to a specific song, or having a conversation with somebody. It can be a feeling or a thought, it can be anything. It can be something really random. But every time it's triggered, that trauma or anxiety builds up in your mind until you get to a stage where it's a very, very severe anxiety or severe trauma, and then it's affecting you in your life, or in your body sometimes. So that's basically how it works as an example for people. So trauma and anxiety doesn't suddenly just disappear one day. You've got to deal with the problem, deal with the cause of the problem.
So that there's an original event that happens in your life, and it could be when you're, I don't know, it could be when you're 1, 2, 10, and that trauma is never fully dealt with or healed or understood, like assimilated within the system. And then when other traumas or other stresses, anxiety happens through your life, it's like a compound effect that it starts to build up, and you've got layers on top of layers.
It triggers the original trauma as well.
Yeah.
So the original thoughts and feelings you got from the original trauma are then triggered by something else that might not be related to it, but there's a similar feeling or a similar situation or a similar person or a similar thought that triggers the original trauma. So you might suddenly go into a situation and get like a really bad anxiety, or you might be talking to somebody, or you might watch something on TV and you feel really anxious and you don't know why. Something in that has triggered something that's happened in the past, or something has been similar to something that happened in the past.
Yeah. So until you get to a breaking point, or something cracks open and you get a floodgate of something like a breakdown, for instance.
Yeah, and that's quite often when, you know, I myself and other therapists see people when they've got to that stage where they are very, you know, they're in a very serious situation where they can't ignore it for any longer, because people just kind of carry on, you know, especially men, as we talked about, just carrying battle on. But it gets to a stage where you can't carry on any longer, because you've got some either severe mental problems or severe physical problems. And that's when, you know, you normally see these people, because it's kind of, they're at the end of the tether, really. You know, no more, you know, nothing else to, you know, no other hope, I suppose.
So we're going to now move on to adding some things to that toolkit for men to deal with, you know, anxiety and sort of trauma, nervous system stuff. And I mean, I've always found that visualization is very useful, and sort of just visualizing for me, I've often done sort of visualizing that I'm cleaning out the gunk, cleaning out the gray energy.
It's very powerful, and I don't think people appreciate, you know, how powerful visualization is, and it's actually the power of your own mind, really, because, you know, if you visualize something, you're creating it in your mind, and then effectively it feeds through your body. So visualization just on its own is a very, very powerful tool, and that's why people quite often do sort of guided meditations, which is visualization, because, you know, I'll give an example. If it's exactly related, but it's a very good example for people, and it kind of how powerful the mind is, really. There was an experiment many years ago. I think it was like might have been Manchester University or something. It was a university experiment, and there was experimenting with how powerful the mind is, really. And what they did is they had two lots of subjects. Half the room, they had them lifting a weight with their little finger. You know, so you've got your little finger there, and you're lifting a weight with your little finger, as an example, just to see how much, you know. And obviously, these people they tested it, and the little finger became stronger, which we know, which you'd expect, wouldn't you? You know, that's what you'd expect. But they also did a test with half of the room, and they tested and they did the same test, but instead of the other people lifting the weight with the little finger, they were imagining lifting the weight with the little finger. They didn't get the same increase in strength in the little finger, but they got I think it was either something like 30% increase. You know, so that's a scientific experiment that actually happened. So it proves that that your mind, if you focus your mind on something physically, and I've done experiments myself with this, and it does work. You know, for example, I mean, anyone can try this who's watching at home. This is a good example. Don't overdo this, because, you know, I did it once, and, you know, don't overdo it. But if you go to the gym, you know, you know what weight you can lift, more or less. You know, people have a weight that they can lift, but that a lot of that is your mind limiting what you can do. I think I'm not sure the actual statistic, but I think with you using the power of your mind, you can lift, I think it's 25 or 30% more weight. So what I did was, and this, I didn't do this actually consciously either. I was I'm not a morning person, so I went to the gym, a bit tired, put some weight on the thing, put too much on actually, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a bit heavy, you know. But I thought, oh, you know, but I've done this before. Anyway, I did it. But I thought, God, it was pretty heavy, that. And I'd lifted like a lot more than I'd ever lifted, and it was because I thought it was less, you know. But I'd never been able to lift it before. But it's your mind, you see. Your mind says, I can do this, you know, and you can. So this is why a lot of we're going off topic a little bit here actually, but I think it's interesting. But you can do a lot more sports wise and physically. You can do a lot more than you actually realize, because your mind is more powerful than you realize.
So just to end on that visualization for men for now who are maybe in situations where, you know, they haven't got the freedom, maybe they've, you know, in an anxious situation, we know, and we will talk about it, that exercise is a key role player. So they could use some visualization. I might even do that myself around the exercise that they are doing to perhaps exceed where they're at and make some real progression in this time where they haven't got control over other things in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk about this more in the next episode. So we're going to talk about physical things and maybe could touch on exercising. So we can talk about that then. But you know, it is a very interesting point, and you know, you brought that point up, Laara, about visualization. You know, and you know, and it doesn't. I mean, the tests show that it doesn't have the same effect as actually doing a physical thing, but it certainly has an impact, and it does have an impact. So potentially, you know, and I've done this myself as well. If you through visualization, you can do certain things, physical things, and you can get some benefits from it without actually doing it physically, which is quite a crazy thing to suggest, but it's true actually. So
it is. I'll tell you next video what I'm going to do along that. I'll start practicing tonight. But we're going to end this one today with an EFT exercise, aren't we?
Exactly.
And you're going to use me. Well, we're both going to do it, aren't we? But you're going to use me.
Yeah. You can follow on, and I'll sort of talk about it and then explain how it works. It's not super complex, but you need to understand the areas. I'll explain briefly what EFT is. It stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. It's sometimes also called meridian therapy. It works on the same principles as acupuncture, but with acupuncture, you put in needles in your body, which I don't like needles personally, so it's not my cup of tea. But you know, it's the same principle. You put in, you know, instead of putting needles in your body, though, you're tapping on acupressure points. These acupressure points we use with EFT are generally on your face or upper body. You know, so you don't need to use your entire body. And the reason for that is the meridians that run down your body run down from your head down to your toes. So every meridian runs all the way down your body. So in order to stimulate or activate or clear, whichever way you want to look at it, you all you have to do is stimulate that meridian, and there's various points which can do that. So in order to do that, you can use the ones that are predominantly on your face or upper body, and it does the same. It does exactly the same thing. It clears that meridian of any problem. And what it does is, if you've got an anxiety or a stress or even pain as well, it works with pain as well. You know, if you focus on that pain, or even if you don't focus on it, if you have it, you're focusing on it anyway. But by tapping on these acupressure points, you're clearing that blockage in your mind, your meridian, and in your body. So, and it's instantaneous. So when you get the correct acupressure point, which could be one of the ones I'm going to show, but you use basically, you go around the whole points, and what it does is it clears each meridian. So one of these meridians is going to clear the specific thought, the pain, or the feeling, or the anxiety that you've got at that stage, because one of them is going to do that. So I'll talk about, Alex, I'll talk about the process now, and you know, you can follow on, Laara, as well. So the first thing you do, the first thing you do is you need to set up a setup statement. So with all, you know, with any sort of therapy or anything that you're doing, you need to you want to achieve or what you want to do. So the first thing is, the first pressure point you're looking at is the one here. It's called the karate chop point. So you can tap this point there. You can do it on either hand. So you can do it on left or right. It doesn't make any difference because you've got meridians running either side of your body. So you're tapping on this point and you're repeating this phrase, even though I have, and then you insert the problem. So if it's just the generic problem, anxiety, even though I have anxiety, I am okay. You always want to put the I am okay at the end, because it's affirming that you're going to be okay and you're going to get, sort of get better. So you repeat that 3 times. You're tapping on this point while repeating this phrase 3 times. Even though I have anxiety, I am okay, and repeating that 3 times. Ideally, you want to speak it out, really. You can say it in your mind, but by speaking it out, it makes it more real, but again, you can say it in your mind as well. Once you've got the process down, once you understand the process, you can also close your eyes and use visualization, which we've already talked about how powerful that is. So you do that 3 times, and the next stage, then you're using the main points. So on each of these points, I'll mention the points first, and then we'll talk about what you do. The first point is inside eyebrow. The second point, outside of your, on line with your eye, just outside your eye there. That's the second point. Third point is underneath your eye, directly underneath your eye there. The next point underneath your nose, that point there, between your nose and your mouth. Then the point underneath your mouth there, that there. The next point is underneath collarbone. So I always use 4 fingers and then tap underneath your collarbone, because it's a difficult point. But if you use your 4 fingers, you'll get the point underneath your collarbone. And the final point is underneath your arm. So it's 4 fingers again. Remember, 4 fingers underneath your armpit, and the bottom finger will be more or less where the point is. If you tap that point under your arm, don't tap it hard because it's an important pressure point, but tap it lightly. And if you feel a little bit of pain, that's the point. It's quite a painful point. So just tap it lightly there under your arm. So they're the points. So I'll go through them again. You got this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, under collarbone and underarm. So easy way to remember is this is a question mark there, and that's your dot there. So you got your question mark there, round there, and then your dot there, question mark. You got your under collarbone, underarm, so that's like a slash. So you go question mark slash. It's a bit like computer code, really, so if you remember question mark and slash, and then obviously karate chop first. So that's easy to remember as well, because if you're really stressed, you might want to karate chop somebody or something. So that's easy to remember if you're stressed. So your karate chop's a good one. So you remember, think, oh, what do I do? Oh, karate chop someone. That's a really good idea. So karate chop. Then you've got your question mark, and then you've got slash. So karate chop question mark slash. So when you're going, after you've done the setup thing, which is even though I've got anxiety, I am okay, repeat that 3 times. You can vary this. You can tap on more or less, but this is generally a good rule of thumb to do this. Then when you're on this point, what you're doing here instead of saying the full thing, what you're doing is you're saying what you are. So you're saying, I'm feeling this, or I'm feeling that. So whatever you're feeling at that stage, you're saying that. So you might be saying, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling anxious. So you repeat it 3 times again. But as you're going round, you might find also that feeling changes. So it might start off with, I'm feeling anxious. You might get to here or here, and you might think, well, I'm just feeling a bit out of sorts, or I'm feeling a bit depressed, whatever. So it could change as well as you're moving around. So if it changes, just change that thought, because the important thing is you want to be mindful of what you're thinking at that stage. You're bringing forward, first of all, by tapping on this, the problem, bringing that to the forefront of your mind. And then from then on, you're then following your mind with what you're thinking. So that can change. But because what happens is, once you get to the point, for example, if this point is a point that releases a lot of the anxiety, then the thought of the anxiety might change to something else. So then you're peeling away a layer of, like, on the analogy is peeling away a layer of the onion. And then the next side, the next level could be something different. You know,
so shall we run through that? I mean, I could start with, even though I'm feeling anxious, I'm okay. Even though I'm feeling anxious, I'm okay. Even though I'm feeling anxious, I'm okay.
Okay, and then you move, then that's it, that one. So you 3 times how you're feeling.
I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling anxious. I am feeling anxious.
Okay, and then that's that.
I feel less anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I feel less anxious. I feel less anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling a little calmer. I'm feeling a little calmer. I'm feeling a little calmer.
Mm-hmm.
I am okay. I am okay. I am okay. Actually, I feel a bit stronger. I'm beginning to feel a little bit stronger. I'm beginning to feel a little stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I feel relaxed. I feel more relaxed. I feel more relaxed. I definitely feel clearer and stronger. I definitely feel clearer and stronger. I definitely feel clearer and stronger.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's the process really. So it's not a particularly long process. We've just done that really quickly there. So you know, you're looking at a minute or so, you know, and once you've done each round, if you've got if you start off with anxiety, you'll find once you've done a round, it's actually feeling better, or it could be completely gone sometimes. And then if you wanted, you could go further into it, and then you do the next feeling then. So I'm not, you know, now you might not be feeling anxious. You might now be feeling a bit depressed, or you might be worried about some specific thing. So then you can kind of go deeper into it in your mind then. So that's.
And I think once you've sort of allocated those spots and you do this, I mean, for me, even without saying the words are very powerful, but even just the tapping, because it's very gentle on your own body, it's kind of being tender with yourself, however you're feeling. So it's nourishing, I guess, is what I want to say. Well, it is.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, if you've got a really bad anxiety, for example, or you're very, very stressed, you don't even need to say anything, because that thing is so strong in your mind that by tapping on that point, your mind's automatically focusing on the problem anyway. You know, so you know, this saying the issue is bringing it to the forefront of your mind. But if you've got a really very severe problem, then by tapping on those points will actually relieve it anyway, because that's what your mind is focusing on at that stage anyway.
And it does stop you, doesn't it? It stops your mind from whirling on backwards and forwards or overthinking. It just kind of, it's very powerful, very powerful.
The reason why you're kind of saying those things over and over is to keep your mind focused on what you're doing, rather than letting your mind wander about, you know, I need to make the tea or put the washing out or whatever. You know, you're focusing on the thing that you're dealing with, which is about, you know, when you're dealing with any problem, you've got to do that, you know, unless you focus, we've talked about this before, unless you focus on the cause or the problem, you're not going to get anywhere. So you've got to get your mind focused on what you're dealing with, and you've got to be honest as well of what's in your mind as well. You know, so but you can get something random might come into your mind. You know, you might be looking at anxiety, and then something random might pop into your mind, but that could be relevant. So
moving that emotion out, moving that original trauma out. Yeah. I've had that with EFT before. Okay, so I think we're going to leave it at that, and I think maybe in the future we could come back to doing a video again on EFT and give some different scenarios. I mean, I think that would be really good for people, anybody who tunes in. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you, Laara.